Well, good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us, whether you're joining us through our live Facebook page or perhaps you're joining us on our Free Will YouTube channel. Listen, we are so thankful, we're so honored that you would join us on tonight for what is guaranteed to be an exciting time. We are so honored and blessed to participate in this discussion that we are calling a crucial discussion, policing in the capital city. We are right here in the incredible city of Montgomery, Alabama, the birthplace of the civil rights movement. So much rich and amazing history here. But listen, we're excited to join in with you on tonight as we go forward again in what is sure to be an incredible conversation. I guess I should go ahead and tell you my name is Quentin Bird, and I have the distinct honor and pleasure of serving as the senior pastor here at the Free Will Missionary Baptist Church, once again here in the capital city of Montgomery, Alabama. We are so honored this year to, for the second year in a row, partner with the Montgomery Police Department as they celebrate the National Faith and Blue Weekend. It has been just an incredible opportunity that we've had to partner with our police department here as we continue to work together to bring and build a healthy and vibrant community here in Montgomery. As concerns continue to grow, as they have been perhaps for the last really 2+ years around our community and really around our nation as there are calls for justice and police reform, and they continue to heighten. Tonight we have an incredible panel of individuals that have convened here for us to dialogue and talk about a number of great topics. Tonight we're going to talk about topics such as police training. We're going to talk about police reform, community policing, the psychological impact not only for officers, but also for those who are being policed. And then we are going to also have one final topic, and that is the topic around mass incarceration. Well, listen, I don't want to talk a whole lot. I want us to dive right in. We're going to be together tonight for approximately 90 minutes or so. We started right at 6 p.m. and we're going to finish around 7:30 or so. But listen, we want you to join in on the conversation. I'm getting ready to introduce this incredible panel of speakers, but if you are viewing us from our Facebook page, I need your help, okay? Do me a favor real quick, just go ahead and tag us, host a watch party, share it with as many people as possible because we want as many people to be a part of the conversation that we can possibly have. Here's the other thing that I want to ask you to do, because we want you to be a part of tonight's discussion. Right there on your screen, if you're watching Facebook, right below the video, there is a comment section. If you have a question, whether you've already thought about it and you've submitted it, or you may think about it as we go along our discussion on tonight, hey, I want you to go ahead and put that question in the comment box. We have an incredible team here that's going to feed me those questions, and we will make sure that we raise them as best we can to our panelists on tonight. So again, let's go ahead and turn our attention to our stage where we have some incredible panelists. I'm going to introduce them to you. I'm going to start from my left and work my way to the right. But tonight we have a community member and again a community activist, Brother Willie Billups, who's joining us tonight. Brother Billups, we thank you so much for joining us. In front, right here beside him, is City Councilwoman. She represents District 4 here in the city of Montgomery, Councilwoman Audrey Graham. Councilwoman Graham, we thank you so much for joining us. We have a licensed therapist. She's not only a licensed therapist, but an entrepreneur, and certainly has a tremendous heart for our community and for those in the community in which she serves. Miss Monique Johnson. and Monique, thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to have the interim chief of police for the city of Montgomery, interim police chief Ramona Harris. Chief Harris, welcome and thank you so much. We also have, he is a partner in the law firm, a great law firm, again, and we're so excited. Preston Presley is here with us. He does a lot of specialty in criminal cases, and so he's going to be able to share with us, I think, from a unique point of view. So, Attorney Presley, thank you so much for joining us on tonight. We are also honored to have with us the district attorney for the county, Montgomery County. He has served in his role for a number of years, and we're so honored that he is serving and sharing with us on tonight. So, District Attorney Daryl Bailey, thank you so much, sir, for joining us on tonight. And last and certainly not least, he is newly elected state representative, and we are excited that he will do what we know will be an incredible job representing those individuals in the 78th district of the state. Will you all help me welcome State Representative Kenyatta Hassel. To all of you, thank you all so much for sharing with us on tonight, and again, welcome here to the Free Will Church. Well, listen, let's dive right into our discussion. And because we are talking about policing in city, Chief Harris, we're going to start with you. I'm going to raise to you the exact same question that a year ago, when we had the opportunity to host this conversation with the then police chief, I want to raise the same question to you. Students across the river region really have received or will be soon receiving their progress reports, letting them know how they've done, if you will, these first 9 weeks of school. What grade, if you will, would you give your department, the Montgomery Police Department's performance during these first full 9 months of the 2021 calendar year, and why?
The grade that I will give the department is above average. I know that we have crime numbers that are high, but every day that the officers come in, they work through the pandemic, they work through the situation that we're seeing across the nation right now with the crime rate that has been up, not just here in Montgomery, Alabama, but everywhere. CDC reported, I have the numbers I want to make reference to, that this is one of the years since the September 11 terror attacks that we've had a great increase, about 30% in violent crimes. So with that being said, I understand there are the challenges that are here, but they still come in every day. We try to have that community engagement, that community commitment, and interaction with the community. As law enforcement, we typically do everyday job as enforcing the law, enforcement. But we're also looking at it from a different perspective, and we're trying to go on the outreach part of it and be proactive in the community without always resulting in an arrest. What can we do to prevent that situation from occurring? So because of that, I will definitely say an above average response.
Thank you. Chief Harris, let me stay with you because you made reference to some of the police stats that you have access to. Recently, the FBI police published a report. It is a lagging report showing the crime rate between the 2019 going into the 2020 year. One of the things that they noted is that violent crime, and specifically homicides, are up 30% across the nation. So to your point, it's not just a Montgomery issue, it seems to be a nationwide issue. But specifically looking here at the city of Montgomery and perhaps some non-lagging numbers, in the calendar year 2020, I believe that Montgomery had around 68 homicides. Here in the month of October, we've already passed the 60th threshold in number of homicides. Tell me what other or additional efforts the Montgomery Police Department, the steps that you all are taking to help combat or curb that number, because by all accounts, it looks as if we might potentially pass where we were last year.
Absolutely. I want to start off by saying a lot of what we see in the homicides, senseless crimes of violence, where people are not communicating with each other and there's no de-escalation or conflict resolution, and it results in gun violence. Out of the homicides that we have a high clearance rate, which is about 75%, and I say that so people can understand The clearance rate is a good number to show that the offender is typically known to the victim. These are people that know each other, acquaintances, as we refer to them. And right now, at least, there's a bit 60% or higher that are known acquaintances, or they know the victim and the offender know each other. With that being said, a lot of this is people that know each other. It's not all domestic. It's some people that may have a disagreement. You have people that want to retaliate versus reach out to law enforcement. A lot of times we'll see people that want to do a prosecution denial where they don't want police involvement or intervention. We'll continue to work on homicides diligently and continue to work with those investigations. Also, we've put extra resources in our investigative unit. One of the things that we've done is combine our investigations. So we have the experienced investigators with the inexperienced new guys that are coming on so they can have that asset to their team to go out there and resolve these homicides or other crimes at a quicker rate that we've seen in the past. And again, we continue to work on it daily with the numbers. But one thing that I want to say with the homicides, and I say this every time I get an opportunity, is for the community to understand when we say see something, say something, speak up. I know it's difficult sometimes and people are afraid to speak on things. There are anonymous ways to report it. And for the most part, we do have that community engagement. But there are some that we tell in the community meetings on a more personal level. Sometimes the offender or the victim may be people that you know. What can we do to change that behavioral pattern before it gets to this crime of homicide? Sometimes you can't prevent it, but sometimes we'll look at the framework and how we bring up the communities and how we interact with each other. So a big part of our focus is community engagement. And also, it takes the village to raise a child, but it takes the community to alleviate the crime problem that we see, as well as law enforcement. So we continue to partner with the community, continue to work on it in every way that we can, but also to continually say that message out there that these are crimes, a lot of these are crimes where people know each other, so we want to look at other ways of conflict resolution, communication, de-escalation, and how to approach situations.
Thank you so much, Chief Harris. Let me ask all of our speakers, when you all speak, if you all will hold the mic directly to your mouth. Some of our viewers are having a hard time hearing us, so if you all would just make sure you do that, that would help us out. Let me turn to Councilwoman Graham, because you represent, in your elected capacity, District 4, but I have heard you say that you represent Montgomery. And so hearing the stats that we've mentioned and the feedback that Chief Harris has shared, talk about what you believe are some steps that we can take as a city outside of just the police department to help combat and curb not only the homicide rate, but perhaps crime rates within the city as a whole. And Chief Harris, we're going to allow you to come back and talk about non-violent crimes and other crimes as well. But Councilwoman Graham, if you could talk about that.
Yes, sir. I actually, I agree with Chief Harris that there are things that we've got to do. I love the fact that she mentioned conflict resolution. I think that's very important. What I do believe, and this has been what I stood on from the beginning of my campaign, is that the community is the first line of defense. Even before MPD comes, even before we dial 911, community is the first line of defense, which means if I see something, just like Chief Harris said, I say something. I don't allow you to come into my neighborhood and cause problems and sit quiet because you're not in my house. If I see an issue, I'm going to report it. We have to become the first line of defense for our communities. And I think that just comes from building the neighborhood associations. That comes from getting out, having events in the community, begin to bring people together, have more neighborly compassion one for another. Because if it's at your house, it can be at my house tomorrow. And I want that same type of compassion at my house. So I got to be willing to give it to you at yours. So if we see something, we should be saying something. We should be rallying. We should be gathering together. The conflict resolution, I think that is something perfect that maybe I can from city council with my neighborhood presidents, because we gather quarterly. I have quarterly meetings. And so when we gather, we can begin to talk about these. We can have, whether it's someone from MPD or someone that can help us with those type of conflict resolution scenarios, to just come in and talk with us so that we can have this type of information to take back into the community. So I do believe that we in the community, we are the first line of defense. That's the main thing for me, where we can help Chief Harris and the MPD officers here in Montgomery try to serve us, because they're not serving another community, they're serving ours. So we can't stand back idle and watch them serve and say they got to do it all. It just does not work that way. It's got to be a partnership. So I appreciate community policing. I think it's excellent. I'm excited for it to be strengthened and for us to take our stand and walk along with MPD as we get some resolutions to crime altogether in the city of Montgomery, not just murders, but just crime altogether.
Yes. Thank you so much. Mr. Billups, Councilwoman Graham just mentioned the importance of community leadership and our neighborhood associations. You have the opportunity to serve as not only a community leader, but to also serve with one of our local neighborhood associations. You, if you will, have boots on the ground and literally are witnessing on a daily basis a lot of what we've heard talk about on today. Will you give your insight, if you will, because we've heard about conflict resolution, but what does that look like on the ground for yourself and other members who perhaps are part of your community?
Yes, thank you, Pastor Burt. I believe that when it comes to crime and dealing with crime, as Chief said and as Councilwoman Graham said, it has to be a partnership. I believe that in something called a 33 1/3% rule, 33 1/3% comes from the parent. If you're not, the child's bedroom is the parent's bedroom. We should go through and look through. That's where your weapons are most of the time. If it's not, it's out in your storage shed somewhere around the house. Parents, we have to get involved. That's 33%. The community as a whole has 33 1/3%. If you see something, say something. As Councilwoman Graham said and Chief said, if you see something, say something. Don't be afraid to do it. The other part comes with the police. It's 33 1/3% again. If either one of us fail, you have a failing grade. So we have to bring all of those together, work together. I think community policing as a whole works. We just have to implement it and carry it through where it works in the community as well as in the households.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Representative Hassel, you represent obviously a district here in really an urban area of the city of Montgomery, but you serve as a state representative. While we've talked about different options and different efforts that we can take on the local level, what do you believe we can do from a state level as it relates to helping to curb violence and crimes, literally, while we're talking about specifically here in the city of Montgomery? Again, you have the opportunity to have dialogue and discussion and really impact or input on a state level, but what are the thoughts that you have?
One of the thoughts that I have is that through the state level, we have a committee. It's the county municipal committee. And on that committee, I would love to create an oversight committee that would help police officers and help the city council or the city municipal itself to help with dealing with the issues that's in the community. Just like the gentleman said about being on the boots on the ground and getting involved. And I got to say this too, though. It's going to take everybody, from clergy to help with families. It's going to take, the neighborhood, like neighborhood association, like Councilman Graham and the chief said. It take all these pieces, and I love that concept of the 33% rule. And also on the state, like I said, going back to the state level, the only thing that we can do is help with funds and also if we can create an oversight committee from the state level to increase funds. Let's say, one of the programs that I did working with Young Life is I taught life skill classes inside the community centers to deal with anger management. And I taught it right at Carver Community Center when they had the community center there. And so we need to fund those type programs again to help deal with the issues of crime.
Okay. Representative Hassel, let me stay with you on my next question, because over the years, concern has grown that many see the relationship between the police and the community as perhaps an us versus them type reality. What do you believe has been some of the contributing factors of this? Well, first, do you agree with that mindset? And if so, what do you believe has been some of the contributing factors to that mindset and that approach?
Well, one of the things that we deal with for years in our community that, when something happened in the family and we are young, if I'm a 9-year-old boy and I see my dad get picked up by the sheriff or get picked up by the police, and we don't know the full story, we just see they taking our dad away. And so in the community, we grew up, you know, through our time and through our history, it's always been a distrust, you know, through the movement times, through through the history of this country pretty much. So, and that stigma is still there. And so I know it's been a lot of efforts to get rid of that culture, but it's still there when we see exactly what's going on. For instance, I think that families need to tell the truth of what's going on with the parents. I mean, if something's going on that somebody did something wrong, got to hold everybody accountable. And we hold everybody accountable, we can say, okay, my dad do something wrong, he did his time. Okay, now I understand with this police officer, why my dad had to go away. You know, we're always innocent, you know, and the thing is sometimes we're not. But we have to change the culture in that. But you know, when we see the abuse through the media, or we see the abuse that's going on within in our neighborhoods, or, you know, I can say, we use the word over-police, or the police are aggressive, let me use that. If they're too aggressive, like, you know, why you're doing this to my child, why you're doing this to my parent, we have to change that type culture to help mend that relationship between the community and the police officer.
Thank you. Chief Harris, I'll come back to you really and continue this discussion because you and the officers that you have the honor of leading, I'm sure that this is something that you all perhaps may see and even experience on a daily basis. Again, this us versus them type mindset. Talk about, again, what you believe some of the contributing factors to that mindset has been. But then also, what are some of the intentional efforts under your leadership are you trying to put in place to help break down, Representative Hassel used the word stigma. What steps are you taking to help break or tear down that stigma?
Well, I want to start off by saying I think Representative Hassel was right on with the stigma that's out there. They see us on the enforcement side of it, on the reactive enforcement side of the law, as far as going out there, making an arrest or intervening when there's a crisis situation going on in the home. And because of that, we focus a lot of our efforts more on that's part of policing, but what can we do to prevent that part and to change that stigma that the society views as a relationship between the police department. One of the things that you said, them versus us, I attended one of the Faith and Blue churches yesterday with Flatline, and one of the things that Pastor Rembrandt said there is, this is us. Not us versus them, but this is us. This is us, Montgomery. This is all of us. And what we have in Montgomery with the crimes that we're seeing, the problems that we're seeing, they're not just the police problems or the community problems, they're all of our problems. So some of the things that we've already began to do to try to change that mindset or that stigma that's out there is we've been engaging with the community more, doing more things on the proactive end, working with the city council, going to meetings with club owners, going to meetings with the car club people that are out there in car activity, also with the apartment complexes. And a lot of that was on the forefront of city council to reach out and have that environment for us to sit in the room with them to have conversations before there's a situation where we're doing something on the enforcement side of it. Also, we're working with Montgomery Housing Authority and joining boards and initiatives with them to continue to work with them to see what we can do within the communities, as well as the clergy. That's something we've been doing for a while, working with Operation Good Shepherd, several of the churches that are in the communities, because sometimes they won't hear us. We can be there and we can talk, but the community can't hear us because of who we are and their perception of who we are, but they can hear the person in the community that they respect, the one that they know, the one that they wholeheartedly trust, because they haven't had that relationship or opportunity to have that trust built with us yet. So we are tapping into the community, the people that are the foundation of those communities, whether it be someone that's a senior or elder in the community, whether it be clergy, or whether it be anyone else. We're also looking at what community resources are already there so that we can actually go out and engage with the community. Parks and Recs has facilities throughout the city. We've reached out to the director there to say, hey, what can we do? What more can we do to engage and reach the youth before it becomes a problem? So often we see people on scenes, we want to see them before the scene. So we're doing that, and also we're partnershiping with Montgomery Public School Systems. Went and had a meeting with Dr. Moore over there to say, can we speak with the principals first? Let's do it virtually, however we have to do it. And then we want to speak with the student body. We want to reach the students and reach the kids before it becomes a crime situation. So we are taking those efforts to go out and reach the community on a proactive end, to engage them, to let them know that this is us. It's not them versus us. This is us, Montgomery.
Okay, thank you. Attorney Presley, let me bring you in because you have the opportunity of talking with individuals who oftentimes are on the backside of an experience with police. And again, they've now become a part of our legal system. I want you to talk about, again, that experience and really as it relates to what are you hearing from them as it relates to their experience with our officers, and what steps do you think our officers can take to help, and not just our officers, but our officers in our community can take to help strengthen those relationships?
Certainly. Can you hear me?
Let's see.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay. You are correct, Pastor Bird. By the time an individual is in my office or either at the Montgomery County Jail, they're behind the 8 ball, per se. And what I have seen, I'll say within the past 2 or 3 years, are some officers are actually out doing police work. They're patrolling. I've had several cases where there are traffic stops, and they're aggressive traffic stops, but they find contraband or they find firearms, and they do what they need to do, charge the individual, whether it be in state court or federal court. And I think MPD, and along with Mr. Bailey's office, has done a great job in implementing certain things to try to get firearms off the street. Obviously, I have to defend some of these cases, but I think that it's proper. If you are a felon and you have a firearm, that's illegal in the state of Alabama, and it's federal law that you should not have a firearm. So when they charge you in federal court, somebody like me has to come in and defend that type of stuff. So I think they are doing a better job working cohesively with the federal government in attempting to take some of the firearms off the street. Now, I will say I have also had a few individuals that have come into my office that did not have so very pleasant run-ins with law enforcement here in Montgomery County. There were traffic stops where I've had some law enforcement officials, they did not announce that they were law enforcement. The first thing that they did was get out of the vehicle with firearms drawn, high-powered weapons. And they approached the vehicle, and the individual's afraid. He has a right to be afraid. And they will, instead of attempting to calm the situation down or go through the routines of what you should do in a traffic stop, it turns out bad. And we have to combat that on the back end. And that's what my office attempts to do. But for the most part, what I have seen is we have law enforcement out patrolling, stopping individuals when they conduct certain traffic violations. They go through the routine procedures of a traffic stop, driver's license, insurance, registration, and at the end of that traffic stop, if they have probable cause or reasonable suspicion of a crime, then they will do what they need to do to snuff that out. And if they need to charge the individual, they'll charge them.
Okay. Thank you so much. District Attorney Bailey, you have served in your role and in your capacity to honor the individuals here in Montgomery County by making sure that you are upholding and fulfilling your oath for the law. You just heard from Attorney Presley that he believes that your office has supported the police department in helping to eradicate or get as many guns off the street as possible. What is your assessment of the crime here in the city of Montgomery? Usually by the time they get to your office, they've already had an encounter with the police department. So talk about the steps that your office is taking, whether through partnerships with the police department or even community partnerships to help combat the crime here within our city.
Pastor, thank you, first of all, for having this. I think this is a great conversation. It's a needed conversation, and we probably need to do this more often. So thank you to you and Free Will for hosting this event. I'm a little different. I'll go ahead and start that way. I am not like many district attorneys across the state and really across the country. And I have a statutory duty of prosecuting cases that the police department brings to me. And if you look in the Code of Alabama that our legislature has written for prosecutors, it's to prosecute cases. But I really don't see that as the complete description of my job, because I believe that district attorneys have so much power and influence to do so much more. And while I'm district attorney, as long as I'm district attorney, as long as I have the energy to do this job, I see my job as being more progressive and trying to stop crime before it happens. And that's what we've got to do. I spend probably more time in our schools than I do the courtroom. And the reason for that is, one thing that I noticed as district attorney is that I can sit here and I can prosecute someone that's committed a homicide and I can send them to prison for the rest of their life. What has that accomplished? Well, it's gotten a bad guy off the street, and I'm not diminishing that. But guess what? There's somebody willing and ready to take that person's place. And if we don't do something about it on the front end and become progressive and start working with our children at a young age, it's just going to keep happening and happening and happening. Now, you are correct when you mention that the crime rates across the country are just skyrocketing. We just today had our 63rd murder in the city of Montgomery. Totally unacceptable. We have over 230 murder cases pending in our office right now. Totally unacceptable number. If you look at those 230 cases, and that's really probably a snapshot of the last 4 years, how many thousands of people in our community has a homicide touched? Thousands. You probably can't walk down the street, walk outside the doors here and encounter someone who's not been affected by homicide in our community. So what I believe that we need to do is we need to start working with our young people. Number one thing that I see is addressing unaddressed mental health issues. You know, unfortunately, I think the state of Alabama has had it backwards for a long time. We're closing mental health facilities, we're stopping mental health treatment, and I think that's wrong. I think there is a lot of unaddressed mental health issues out there with our children that need to be taken care of and that we need to be dealing with. I could talk for another hour, but my time is up. But.
You're good. Continue. No, please continue.
Okay.
You're finished your comment.
Yeah, so unaddressed mental health issues is one. Getting guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them. You know, that's been talked about. There are way too many guns on the streets. We're seeing 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids walking around with guns. Totally unacceptable. I think Mr. Billups said, and I want to echo this because I think it's extremely important, we have got to get back in our country, in our city, and I'm really just care about Montgomery right now because that's where my heart is. We've got to get back as parents to parent. If you're not going, I tell parents this all over the city when I talk. If you don't know what your child's doing on social media, if you're not looking through their phones, if you're not going through their room looking for guns, drugs, whatever kind of things they have in their rooms, you're not doing your job as a parent. You're not doing your job as a parent. We've got to be proactive. And that when we find these things or find that our children are not behaving like they're supposed to be behaving or hanging around the wrong people, we need to call out for help. And my office, we have a wonderful Helping Families program that addresses that. I'd love to talk about that a little later. But we have a Helping Families program that can address those issues before a child comes into the criminal justice system. Often it's too late once a child enters the criminal justice system to do something about it. It's a lot better to do something about it on the front end. So we've got to get these guns off the street and get these guns out of the hands of our young people. And also what's been mentioned, and I want to echo this, is conflict resolution. We cannot get serious about crime reduction in our city unless we teach our young people how to resolve conflicts. And that's what most of these homicides are about. Some type of conflict that when you and I, well, you're younger than me, but when I was younger, we would settle conflicts by either talking them out, sometimes it would result in a fist fight, but never would it result in me pulling out a gun and shooting someone. And that's what's happening. That's the first resort right now. It's not, there's no talking it out. There's no fist fights. It's pulling out a gun and ending someone's life. And we've got to address that, and we've got to get serious about that before we can see our crime rate go down.
Thank you so much. The district attorney mentioned the mental health component that is connected to a lot of the challenges that we're facing. We know that specifically in the African American community, mental health is unfortunately sometimes seen as just a stigma and sometimes not spoken of or talked about. I want to bring Monique Johnson into the conversation, the entrepreneur of restorative counseling, a licensed counselor herself. Monique, I want you to talk about really the mental health component that you have seen or that you really help to address with individuals within our community that perhaps can shed some light on some of the challenges that we're facing within the capital city of Montgomery.
Absolutely. Everything starts with mental health. Great point about schools. We have to have mental health in schools. So I think people miss the big picture is that we can provide conflict resolution, we can provide neighborhood watches, we can do all those things, but if people aren't mentally in a state to receive, then these efforts they fall on deaf ears. So, what I've experienced with kids who come in, treating children who are traumatized because their parents got pulled over because they see from social media that they may not make it home. Teenagers who don't trust the police because they see what's happening on social media. Oftentimes, police are called to help in situations and it ends up escalating to something else, so then that's where the distrust comes in. Education is the key to most things, period. We have to educate people about what law enforcement's role is and bringing the community together. And, I think you guys talked about, making your presence known in the neighborhood, letting them know that you're here to help, not to hurt. But again, if your mental state is not in a good space, you're not going to be able to receive that. In schools, if I had it my way, mental health would be a class. It would be something everybody have to go through at some point throughout the day. Parents aren't educated on what's going on. Great point. They're not going through phones. They don't know what the kids are doing. They're using electronics as a way to just kind of keep them quiet so they can go about work and do the things they need. All of this stuff is brewing on social media. A lot of things that they get, information comes from social media. Most of it is inaccurate. But we as parents and people of the community have to come back and say, where do we start? Education. We need to put mental health in the schools. We have to, provide resources. Medicaid is a big funding in Alabama as far as health, but mental health also. Medicaid cuts mental health off at the age of 19. Then what do? That's when a lot of issues start. So that's an issue in itself. Legislation has to do something about how we're going to cover these services. We have to let these kids know that somebody's here to help them along the way. And parents are struggling. Oh my God, parents are struggling almost as bad as the kids because they're trying to balance parenting, working, providing, and still stand on top of what they need to do day-to-day life. So for me, in my role, when I see a child, I don't see just a child. I see the parent. Who else is helping you raise your child? Grandmama down the street. Grandmama, come in, we need to talk to you too. Who else is involved? Dad that's not really involved, but he lives in another city. Let's get him on Skype. Everybody is involved. What we do at Restorative Counseling Services, we wrap our arms around the entire family because we have to treat the family if we're really going to do any change as far as how these kids understand how to navigate life. Conflict resolution is absolutely amazing if it's done in a space where people can receive it.
Monique, let me stay with you for a moment because there is sometimes a challenge in understanding the difference between mental health and mental illness. One of the things, and you and I have had a number of conversations about this, every single one of us experience mental health. Not all of us have a mental illness, and sometimes I think it's possible that people mix the two up. Will you give really just a quick explanation about the difference in the two and really the importance for all of us to make sure that we have healthy mental health, if that makes sense?
Great Great question. So mental health is what we all struggle with day to day, making good choices, anxiety. We all experience anxiety at some point of our life. We all experience depression at some point. But when these issues go to a point where you can't function day to day, and when it prohibits you to being able to do your daily living skills, then that's when it becomes an illness. When you can't communicate, when you respond before thinking, when you're not being treated, there are diagnoses where people have anxiety, depression, and they never have to take medication. They come in for counseling, we teach coping skills. But people who have mental illnesses that reach above that, where they can't function, that's when you come into mental illnesses, where it impedes on your day-to-day living. And in police, my heart goes out to police officers. They want to go home like everybody else. When they leave, they want to come back home. And I don't understand, and maybe somebody can shed light for me on that situation. How is it that you can go and do these stops every day, you witness violence, you witness murders, but you don't go and you get the help you need? Who are they able to talk to? Because at some point, when you're fed and you're filled with that every day, you come on the job with anxiety. You come on the job not knowing what to expect. Sometimes you become aggressive when you're making a simple stop because of what happened yesterday. How do the police unload? Who helps them? So I feel like mental health needs to be wrapped around everybody. Everybody needs to be talking about how do we debrief from what's happening day to day. And I just feel like that's the big issue here. Everybody needs a place and a space to be able to break down and process what's happening with them. So you have mental health, which we all need to be supportive of. That could be walking, that could be exercising, things that you do to take care of yourself. Work is work, home is home, but what do you do to take care of you? Mental illness is when it goes way beyond that and it impedes your day-to-day living.
Thank you so much. Chief Harris, a question has been raised. And before we get to the part about the officer and what steps maybe the department is taking for them to unload or so that they're not carrying, there's also something that was alluded to a little bit earlier, and that is the mental health of the community as a whole. We talk about young people, and one of the things I've heard a few times, social media, there used to be a time when if you were bullied at school, at 3 o'clock when the bell rang, at least the bullying would stop at least until the next day. With social media, the bullying continues and there is no reprieve, which potentially impacts the social psyche of our young people that can potentially even escalate. We've seen across the country, I don't know how much of that is here in Montgomery, but I know that we've seen challenges as it relates to homicides connected to bullying all around social media. What steps is the department taking to help identify those challenges within our young people so that they find a place of reprieve? But then also after that, if you would then answer the question about what are our officers doing so that they have a safe space to unload and not carry the weight of really the job with them, to a place of being unhealthy.
And on that topic of bullying, we'll go back to conflict resolution. I know we don't have an MPS representative, but after speaking with the superintendent, they do have programs now that they have throughout the schools. They have guidance counselors that are in the schools that assist the children as well. On the police department side, we have school enforcement officers who are really in the know with the kids in the school. They know the students that attend the schools that they serve, and they have a good relationship with them. The kids will come and talk to them often and let them know about things that are going on and offer any resources that we have. On the police side of it, we have peer support within the department, but we also have counseling that we provide for the officers if they're going through something. This very conversation came up last night out on the scene because as we're looking at our, as mentioned earlier, 63rd homicide for the police department, that's 63 families that experience a homicide in the city. But oftentimes it's maybe a small group of homicide investigators that are responding to all of those homicides. And they're going through that same trauma that the family is going through because they're out there. And I understand it's part of the training and it's part of the job that they do, but they're also human. They have families that they go home to. They have feelings. One of the things that we like to focus on is policing with empathy and being able to understand what that person, what the family is going through. And also understanding that just because it's your job or duty as a police officer to respond to the scene, that you have to not ignore your own personal needs or mental health that you're going through as well. And if they need the counseling, oftentimes they won't ask for it. But as supervisors, we try to tell the supervisors, make sure you're paying attention to your officers. You know changes in their behavior or any things with their pattern, or if you know their workload and what they have to do day in and day out. Sometimes they don't request treatment, but we try to get them out there to see a counselor just to have someone to talk to. And like you said, mental health is something that we all go through. The officers get training and crisis intervention training because sometimes people are just going through a crisis at that moment. It's just not something that's a long-term thing, but just a short term. But we definitely focus on their mental health as well as the commanders and not just officers that are out there. But we do that by counseling also, counseling services.
Thank you. We're going to go into the topic of police training because you just mentioned that. But before we do that, Monique also mentioned that we need to educate individuals on the role of police officers. I don't want to make this a political event, but during the last presidential administration, there is a term that was thrown around that had unfortunately become a political term, and it is a term law and order. And unfortunately, when those in the African American community hear that term, it is said that that brings about a very negative connotation, and perhaps because of recent events that we have suffered in our community. Councilwoman Graham, again, I want to kind of turn to you because when you hear that term, what comes to mind for you?
Well, Pastor, when I hear that word law and order, it's just that there's law and there will be order. And again, our communities tend to be the focus of bringing order. It's as if other communities aren't out of order, but our communities are the only ones out of order because we feel that the law and order always come down to the black community. And that does not create the atmosphere between police and community policing in the neighborhoods that we want. That's just not what we want to have. So I piggyback again on Chief Harris that, there has to be, this is us, not us versus them. But law and order kind of says, I give the law and you're going to be in order. And that's just not, we can't function very well that way. We have to understand there is law and we have to obey the law. When we're out of order, there are consequences to that, but no one is looking in your community every day. No one is pulling you over expecting you to have broken the law so they can get on to you or they can take you to jail and you're the focus of their day out on the job. That's just not what we want to get, because that's what I think what people tend to have felt in my community. They felt as if they see me riding down the street, they pull me over automatically because I'm black. That's not it. That's not it. And I think here in Montgomery, we don't have that. But I think that's the stigma that came with that word, law and order. They're going to pull all of us over. It's going to always be us. We're going to always be the first ones. But we don't have that here in Montgomery. And I'm so grateful for that. I rarely get pulled over. Not that I always drive the speed limit. Sometimes the hill pulls me and gravity makes me speed up. It's not me, y'all. I'm going to tell you. But that's just not. Our police officers are really looking how can they serve and protect in our communities, and that's what I find here in the city of Montgomery. But that word has too much negative kind of tone around it, and so I'm so grateful that we don't live in that stigma here in the city of Montgomery.
Attorney Presley, thank you so much, Councilwoman Graham. Attorney Presley, you mentioned just a moment ago a word that perhaps many of those who you come in contact with believe that they are over-policed. I wonder with you and again the environment that you find yourself in, when you hear the word law and order, again, as someone who represents our judicial system, if you will, what does that word or what does that phrase mean to you? Or I don't know if you've had conversation to determine what that phrase even means to some of those that you have the opportunity to represent.
Yes, sir.
You're on?
Am I on?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Law and order, obviously we have to have law. Without some type of system in place within our society, it would be chaotic. So we have to have law and we have to have order within our communities. I will also say that along with those two words, we have to have justice. And justice is both sides. It's justice for victims, along with justice for individuals who may have been charged with a crime and should be vindicated. And that's part of my job, looking into a case, ensuring that their constitutional rights have not been violated, and also ensuring that these facts that have been purported by law enforcement, the DA's office, are the actual facts that should be submitted to the court. So I think what I will say, and it is somewhat off topic, I think that we sometimes forget that we all are a part of this community. Law enforcement, district attorney's office, city council, we all are a part of the community, and we all have roles within the community. And just because we have these roles and some of us are leaders within the community does not mean that we are not a part of the community. So in saying that, I think so long as we all perform our roles and do it within the confines of the law, we will have law and order, and we will also have justice.
Thank you, sir. Chief Harris, let me turn back to you now, because as I just mentioned, I want to direct or turn our conversation to police training. Recently, last year specifically, there was a lot of discussion around certain behavior or certain techniques that police officers around our country were using in order to, de-escalate or really kind of control the situation that may have been chokeholds and things of that nature. Earlier this year, on the national level, Congress passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which was really designed as a wide range of policies regarding policing practices and law enforcement accountability. Knowing that new law that had been passed, walk us through how your department is now training, or if there was any difference in the training that your officers get to ensure that they're not, number one, violating that act, but also not violating the constitutional rights of individuals who may be pulled over and stopped.
Okay. Yes, I'll address that by stating first, looking at what the state of Alabama had already required going into this 2021 year. One of the things that we've seen with our Alabama Peace Officer Standard Training Commission with the state of Alabama that certifies all police officers in the state, they'd actually increased their training curriculum to be able to institute some of those things such as dealing with mental health or dealing with crisis intervention. So they already expanded the curriculum from a 480-hour curriculum to a 560, which is going to be a requirement for any police officer in the state going through training. Some of that will also include defensive tactics training, which is something that we've already had, the defensive tactics training, telling officers how they should perform if they're in a situation. One of the things that we did with the no chokeholds and duty to intervene is we actually have policy to support that. And we stand by the policy and we enforce the policy. Every officer is aware of the policy, they're trained on it. They're also offered additional training throughout the training on racial and implicit bias training, a de-escalation training, as well as the duty to intervene and effective communication. Because a lot of this boils down to how professional we do our job as police officers. We understand that we have to enforce the law, but one of the things that was mentioned earlier was an aggressive traffic stop. And it goes back to educating the community on the difference, where one officer may be observed doing a traffic stop where they're asking for the driver's license, registration, and insurance. Well, that's probably what they perceive at that time to be a low-risk stop. But at any time, we refer to as no such thing as a routine traffic stop. You may think that you're pulling over someone that ran a stop sign, and they may know in their mind that they just robbed a bank. So your mindset is not at the same place as that person's mindset. And also, officers are trained in those what appear to be aggressive stops where they see the gun or someone saying with a gun. That's usually something that's a crime, a violent crime or a felony. And the officer already has that information, whether it's through dispatch, whether it's the vehicle they're looking for, maybe a business or something was recently robbed and the vehicle matches the description, although it may not be the vehicle. So there are some circumstances where the perception may show you one thing, but it's also a training thing that we've already trained on and they continuously train on, and we work on that. But going back to the chokehold, that's something that we do have in our policy. We have policies on that. We have the policy for duty to intervene. I think it's important to talk about that also, because sometimes we ask the community to see something, say something, but we have to stand up with integrity as officers as well. If you see something that you know that does not go in line with your training as a police officer being exhibited from another police officer, you should speak up and say something as well, or intervene at that point.
And I want to just continue down that line of questioning based upon a comment that you just made. We've heard throughout our country this blue wall, if you will, that would suggest that regardless of your ethnic background, if you are a police officer, you should stand with other officers, despite if the incident that one may witness is, not according to the guidelines and policies of the department. Do you, as a police chief, do you encourage your officers to make sure that they are open to share what's happening with other officers without having any fear of retaliation or any of those things? If you're doing that within the Montgomery Police Department, what do you believe other departments can do to help ensure that officers are seeing and saying something perhaps against other officers who may not be representing the department as you would like for them to?
Well, one of the things that we explain to them all the time is they say one officer's bad actions smears the reputation of the whole entire department. So if you know that someone is doing something wrong, you have a duty and obligation to speak up, and if you're there at the moment, to stop that action from happening. And that's one of the biggest things that we talk about a lot, is accountability and responsibility. And we have a huge authority when we come to enforce the law, but we have a public trust to do our job with moral character and do it the right way and right by every citizen. And one thing I tell every academy class is, when you go to a call, whenever you respond to anyone's residence, my expectation is for you to treat that person just as you would want your fellow officer to treat that being a family member of yours that you're responding to a call of service. And we always say, do unto other people as you want them to do unto you, but I'm a firm believer in treating someone with your expectations of how you should be treated as well. And sometimes people don't know how they should be treated, but you know what's right, because if you don't know, we teach you what's right while you're at the academy. So I have a high expectation of moral character and transparency within the department. They know it's open communication. They can come forward with anything. And if they don't feel comfortable in the process, the City of Montgomery also has the Office of City Investigations that will take any complaint from a citizen dealing with a city employee, whether it be a police officer or any other person that works for the City of Montgomery.
Thank you so much. I do have one more question for you, and then I promise you I'll share the questions with the others. As it relates to police training, there is a Pew Research poll that says 71% of those surveyed strongly agree that police officers should be trained in non-violent alternatives to deadly force. Now, this may be something that you're already doing, but the perception that many in the community have when, again, there's a police-involved shooting a lot of times, many will ask the question, well, why didn't they just shoot them in the leg or shoot them in the arm, or why did it result in deadly force? With the recruits that are coming through Montgomery Police Department, is that a policy that they're being trained, or is that a behavior that they're being trained to use non-deadly force? Or if not, what is the training, and why is that the training?
Well, when it comes to deadly force as a whole, you look at it from a law enforcement perspective or from a citizen. Of course, the state of Alabama doesn't give you a right to use deadly force in the protection of property. You're doing that in defense of your life or someone else's life, and in defense of the life of another. So it's important that you do that. And oftentimes when people have the statements, well, why didn't they shoot him at the leg or in the leg or the arm? If you have a moving target that's running away from you, your body is going through the emotional state of, psychological state of where you are at that time and what you're analyzing. Even with precision, that's a difficult task to put on anyone, to be in that situation, to shoot a leg instead of, we shoot to stop the threat, to alleviate that threat, whatever the case may be. Not to get heavily into deadly force training aspects of it, but the officers are properly trained in deadly force encounter. It is no officers, in my opinion, no officers wish to ever have to use deadly force in their career. No one wants to be in that situation, and when they're in that situation, That's just something that no one feels comfortable being in. But at the same time, we have a job to do with the Montgomery Police Department to make that citizen safe, or whoever the other person is, safe in a situation, or whether it be the officer themselves to go home. Like someone mentioned, we all have families, we all human, and at that time, if they're using deadly force, we encourage, or we make sure it's enforced, that it's legally justified based on how they're taught and trained with the law and the requirements of the state and federal law.
Okay, thank you so much. Staying with police training, but also bringing in a little bit of police reform. Attorney Presley, I want to turn to you now, and I'll also raise this question to you, D.A. Bailey. There is a legal doctrine, as I understand it, called qualified immunity, which, as I understand, is designed to generally protect officers from being held personally liable in lawsuits unless they commit clear violations of the law. Also, another Pew Research shows that 2/3 of Americans, roughly 66%, say that civilians need to have the power to sue police officers to hold them accountable for misconduct and excessive use of force, even if that makes the officer's job more difficult. Do you believe that doing away with qualified immunity will help or hurt our police department here in Montgomery?
I think it would help. What I will say is I think that our officers do a decent job of not violating certain constitutional rights that an individual may have. My office does civil rights work. We have had individuals come into the office, and we have had clear violations of the law done by certain law enforcement officials, not just individuals here in Montgomery, but surrounding counties as well. But when you take a claim to federal court, if it is not egregious, if it is not someone breaking an arm, breaking a leg, something very serious, then you are essentially dismissed before you file the petition and before it's served on the parties. I think that if reform is done to the Immunity Act, I won't say doing away with it altogether, but if it is reformed in a way that is also shows some equality as far as the citizens that are bringing these claims, I think it will certainly do more for officer training. I think they will be more mindful of how they interact with certain individuals. And it would certainly help policing overall, in my opinion.
Thank you. District Attorney Bailey, same question to you. Qualified immunity, while there are many who are raising the alarm, or if you will, sounding the alarm to do away with it, do you believe that that would hurt or help policing here in the city of Montgomery?
First of all, I know when not to speak on something I'm not qualified to speak on. And that is a civil issue. Of course, I deal with criminal issues. What I will say, as far as it relates to prosecution, first let me say I think that police-community relations is something that we constantly need to work on. Even in my office, I try to help with that. We created an I-LEAD program. We go into 5th grade classrooms in non-COVID years, and we're in all elementary schools. We partner with the Montgomery Police Department. One of the purposes of going in there with the Montgomery Police Department is to show kids that prosecutors and police officers, 99.9% of us, care about them and are out there doing our jobs, and we want them to come to us when they need help. And we want them to realize that we are there to help the community, not hurt the community. So I think that's important. I think we need to continue doing those type of things. It's amazing when we first walk into these 5th grade classrooms how cold it is. The kids look at us, you can tell a little bit of scared when they see a police officer walk in with the gun and the badge, or they see me walking in with a suit on. But it's amazing, probably 6 weeks into that program, when those kids are hugging us when we walk in the door and are hugging us when we leave, and are begging for us to come back and spend time with them. So I do think that we need to do more of these community relations with police officers and prosecutors. As far as it relates to police officer misconduct, I've had, in my job capacity, to prosecute police officers. I've done that in my 25 years. I've prosecuted police officers that have committed crimes. That's my job, and I will continue to do that. If a police officer breaks the law, they don't have a friend in me. They're going to be prosecuted just like anybody else. And I've done that throughout my career. So, I do believe, obviously, that police officers have to follow the law. As far as civil consequences, I'm going to leave that to the civil lawyers. I know Attorney Presley gave his answer. I'll leave it up to the civil lawyers to answer that.
Thank you, District Attorney. Mr. Billups, I want to come to you because the District Attorney just mentioned really this idea and partnership, again, with community and community policing and really community involvement with law enforcement in general, the DA's office, the police department. There is this idea that, and I want to kind of piggyback on what he talked about, when he goes into a fifth grade classroom and initially there's a cold reception and eventually it warms up. For many in an African American neighborhood, there was a time when for a period of their life they would see the officer as officer friendly. And then at a certain age, officer friendly is no longer officer friendly. That officer now becomes a threat. When you think about community policing, what does that mean to you, and how can that combat the challenge between young people and how they see or interact with police so that it's not the cold approach that the district attorney just mentioned?
Thank you, Pastor Byrd, for that question. It's ironic because I was talking to some people today about community policing. I'm a 22-year Air Force vet. I CLEP a couple of criminal justice courses. And while CLEPing them, I studied mildly community policing. And with community policing, it's vitally important. The thing is it has to be practiced and implemented in the correct manner. Some people feel as though it doesn't work. I feel it works because, as D.A. Bailey just said, I mean, the thing is going into that classroom early on, those kids are just paranoid because, as the counselor said, social media has already enlightened them, on the acts of George Floyd, for instance. And so there's a stigma, the negative side of it. They see them as a negative. Well, once they come a certain amount of time, those kids are going to start loosening up. I actually mentored a group, say about 8 years ago at a middle school here, and ironically, it was the same thing for me. They didn't want to talk to me. Who is this guy? But as you go into it and you start to let them know that you're a person just like they are, meaning the police as well, they start to loosen up, or the DA as well. They start to loosen up, and they realize that you're not an enemy, you're an adversary. You're a person that's gonna make life better for them. But community policing, to me, I feel that there are certain things that should be done, and I'm not here to try to tell the police how to do their job, but I know getting out into the community, not just riding the car through, but just walking out into the communities and talking to the people. Crimes are actually solved that way, but if they feel like you're coming there just to arrest, they're not going to talk to you at all, just like D.A. Bailey said. But if you come out and you socialize, you shoot basketball with them, you bring them some candy or ice cream, whatever the case is, and those kids and adults will actually loosen up. They may whisper to you on the side, everybody heard, 10 years ago, no snitch. Nobody's going to snitch. Nobody's going to talk to the police. But I guarantee you, if you establish a rapport with them, these guys and girls will actually want to talk to you. That's where your crimes are solved.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Representative Hassel, I want to come to you, and I really want to follow up with the same question. When you think about community policing, while you represent your constituency on a state level, they're still local constituents. When you think about community policing, what does that mean to you, and what steps do you believe our local police can take to help either improve or continue to strengthen community policing?
I'm gonna use this term. I call it the Andy Griffin concept. Everybody knew who he was. Everybody knew exactly what he stood for. And they was used. I mean, he was a family man. The values itself, everybody in that community understood, even though it was a show. But everybody understood who Andy Griffin was and what he represented. And I believe that if I live in a community and you got a kid, and you got a kid that live. I grew up in Brookview, and you might have a guy that dealt with mental illness. And if you had a police officer that stood in that community for a long period of time, and he understand who that kid is and the stuff that he's doing, he's not causing problems. See, he'll know that as long as he's there. I understand that, I don't know how that process worked, Chief, but I think they rotate officers through a period of time through different districts. But I do believe that community policing will be effective. I really support it if everybody if the officer would know that community, if he can be in that community for a period of time. And I think it'll work. I wanted that. I talked to the former chief about that a lot of times, about putting police officers in the community and let them stay there. I don't know the ins and outs about it, that's true, but I would love for that to be, I would support that.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me say this really quickly because we are about 20 minutes out from our time together on tonight. Again, thank you all so much for watching, whether you're watching us through our YouTube channel or on Facebook. Let me invite you to be a part of the conversation. Remember, if you are watching us on Facebook, right below the video, there's a comment section. Please feel free to submit any questions that you may have for the panelists. We would certainly love to hear from you and make sure that we raise those questions to the panelists to get the answers that you would like to hear. Let me now turn our attention, because there are two final topics that I want to make sure that we can get some type of conversation in. I want to further our conversation around the mental health piece, but I also want to start talking about mass incarceration. There is, I think, perhaps one of the best books that I've ever read. It was a 2015 book by an author, Michelle Alexander, called The New Jim Crow. In the book, she states, or if you will, alleges that the new challenge that we have for civil rights, and really a new version of, unfortunately, I hate to use the word because it can be a trigger word, but slavery, is mass incarceration. I understand that recently the state of Alabama gained really national attention when lawmakers, and Representative Hassel, I promise you I'm not going to pick on you about it, but national attention was gained when lawmakers recently approved the plan to use $400 million of the American Rescue Plan to help build 3 new prisons. It is said that 2 of those 3 new prisons will be supersized or mega prisons. As I've read the bill, there are 6 prisons that will close because we understand that Alabama has a prison overcrowding challenge. But the issue that many raise is that these 3 new prisons, 2 of them said to be supersized or mega prisons, are not just creating enough beds for the current overpopulation, but they are creating a supersized number of beds that some will feel those beds will need to be field, if you will, which then creates another challenge. So, District Attorney, I want to start with you because your office, and many people may or may not realize this, but it is the District Attorney who determines what charges and, again, how many charges will be assessed in a particular area. While the police arrest people, it's not the police who determines the charges. It is, again, those individuals who are in your office. We understand also that our prisons have a significant population of non-violent offenders. Some of that is because of different statutes and rules that our prison commission have put into play. But from your vantage point as the district attorney, what steps can you take to help? And let me back up and say this. It is also believed that putting people in prison is not a solution to a crime problem. You may or may not agree with that, but there are some who would suggest that. And so knowing that to be the case, that this is what many believe, what steps is your office taking to, again, ensure that there are alternative solutions other than imprisonment for those who may have, committed a crime?
Yeah, so I lead the state in this issue, I believe. I am a huge believer in giving people a second chance, third chance, fourth chance, maybe. We have a pretrial diversion program in Montgomery that runs out of my office that is unlike any in the state of Alabama. First of all, we were the first pretrial diversion program in the state of Alabama. So we've been doing this longer than anybody else in the state and probably the country. What I have done with that pretrial diversion program, and for those of you who do not know what I'm talking about, for those who commit a nonviolent offense, we divert them from the criminal justice system into a program that provides counseling, individual counseling, group counseling, mental health services. We provide job training. We help them get a job. We make them further their education, whatever that may be. Those who are not academically inclined, we get them job skills. We have a lot of partnerships where we work on job skills, whether it's plumbing or pipe fitting or whatever. I want the person to be better off when they leave our program than when they came into our office. The great news about that program is that about 90% of the people who graduate from that program, it's been as high as 95, 96% of the people who graduate that program never come back into the criminal justice system. I have recently enacted a program in conjunction with that, dealing with people who are addicted to narcotics. They don't even have to go in to see a judge anymore. Used to, in order to get into a pretrial diversion program, they would have to go into the court system. They'd have to wait for the Department of Forensic Sciences to come back. Sometimes it'd be 2-3 years down the road before they could get the help that they need, because we're talking about an addiction problem, not really a crime problem. And I understand that sometimes those addictions drive people to crime. I'm not saying that, but we don't want to punish people for having an addiction problem. So what we are doing now in the district attorney's office, and I'm the first in the state and probably the country again that's doing this, they don't have to go to the judge. They don't even have to see a judge. The day they are arrested, they can come into our program. And they don't even have to plead guilty to do it, because we want to get them help as soon as possible and try to get them off of their addiction and get them employed and educated so that they can turn their lives around and make their family and their lives better. What was happening is, waiting 2 or 3 years, and most of them would bail out of jail while they're waiting on their court dates or, come around. Well, guess what they were doing? They're still addicted to the drugs. They're still out there using. They're still out there causing their family problems. They're still out there stealing to support their habit. This way, we can get them help on day one. So that's one of the major things that we are doing in our office to try to prevent this. I applaud the efforts of our state legislature. I know our representatives here in Montgomery tried their best to enact even more legislation, which I supported, to divert people, especially nonviolent people, from prison. But one of the things that we got to do, and Representative, I'd love to work with you on this, but we've got to help people expunge their records a lot sooner. Those nonviolent people that I'm talking about that we help, they have to wait after they finish our program 1 year in order to get it cleared from their record. So guess what? In that year's time, they're still suffering the consequences of the crime that has already been taken care of. We've already hopefully rehabilitated them, got them on the right path. They're ready to go out and get that job and start working to provide for their families, but they can't because they have to wait for a year under the current legislation that we have, and that's wrong. So we've got to do something about that, and I'm willing to work on that. Now, the other part of this, I do want to correct you on one thing. One of the things that my research has shown through the Sentencing Commission, through the state of Alabama, is that most people in prison today are there on a violent offense, not a nonviolent offense. Most people think that the prisons are full of people who have committed drug crimes or property crimes, and that simply is not true anymore. Because of the progressive actions of some of our legislators, we have, I believe, corrected that and curbed that tide. Now, as far as violent offenses, I'm going to be honest with you. I support people going to prison if you kill somebody. I think you need to get off the streets. It's too late at that point. We need to get you off the street before you harm somebody else. And so I don't apologize for that. I think if you commit a violent offense, you need to go to prison. I also support the building of prisons for this reason. Our prisons are in deplorable condition, inhumane condition, and we need to correct that. And I think hopefully by building these prisons, we can correct that, because right now, most people get surprised by this, but right now in our prison system, there are more drugs in prison than there are out on the streets. There are more crimes being committed inside the prison than really out on the streets. And we've got to correct that. People are coming out of prison more addicted to drugs than they were when they went into prison. So I hope that by building a prison that is safer, that's maybe more humane, that we can correct some of those issues. But as far as what I'm doing as district attorney is our pretrial diversion program and opening that diversion up to as many people as we can on the nonviolent crime side.
District Attorney, there was a question that came in through our Facebook audience that said, and it sounds that you've answered the first part of the question, but I want to give you an opportunity to answer the second part. This individual's question says, is the DA's program working? And if so, why are we building mega prisons? A part of that may be the prisons are not just for Montgomery County, they're for the state, but I want to give you an opportunity to answer that question.
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. Again, I think one, our prisons are in deplorable condition. They're in very, very bad condition. But two, you're right. There are people being sent to prison every day, all across the state. And I can't answer for what's happening outside of Montgomery. I can only answer what's happening inside of Montgomery. I mean, if you look, we've had, 63 homicides that have been committed in the city of Montgomery this year. My goal is going to be for those 63 offenders to go to prison. And unfortunately, if our homicide rate keeps increasing, more people are going to be going into the prison system. So, I think it's a twofold question. I'd leave it to our legislator on the panel. He probably has a lot more inside information than I do about the building of prisons. But what I do support is imprisoning violent offenders, but I do support doing that in a humane fashion.
Thank you, sir. And I appreciate you mentioning again about the sentencing piece. I encourage all of our viewers to go out. There is access to the Alabama Sentencing Commission. They produced a most recent report about the population of our prisons here in the state of Alabama and what that population is made up of. So thank you so much for that. Monique, I want to turn to you now because, again, I don't want our conversation to end without really talking a little bit further about the mental impact. We've touched on it just a little bit, but both the mental impact to both our officers, but then also to those who are being policed, and any additional steps that you think we should take as a community, as the department, the police department, whether it's our state legislature, our city leadership. What steps do you believe that we should continue to take in addition to those that you've already mentioned when it comes to the mental health of both our officers and the communities who's being policed?
First of all, it's school. I'm honing in on the school systems because that's where a lot of things start. Kids spend a lot of time at school. Parents are focused on parenting. Teachers are focused on teaching. Although they have programs in the school, you have to look at the efficacy of these programs. Teachers aren't able to pick up on everything that's happening in these classrooms because they're trying to provide instructions. Parents aren't able to pick up on everything that's happening because they're trying to provide the basic needs of their kids. So we have to have programs in place to say, kids who come to the office for these reasons, we have to extend just, oh, you go to ISS or you're suspended. If a kid gets suspended for something, they need to be provided with counseling services as well as the parents so everybody can get an understanding of what's happening and why. We are quick to see a behavior in a kid but not get to the root of why kids are behaving the way that they do. And a lot of times it's because they don't have time. Everybody's moving on to their tasks. Nobody has time to get to the root of it. We have to create more programs with people who have time to do that. That's how we're going to address a lot of these issues. Somebody has to slow down long enough to pay attention to our kids because our kids are bringing all of these things home. They're growing up in the communities. They're committing these crimes because they're not educated. Nobody's really taking the time to do the one-on-one with them. Police officers, I heard what the chief said about that as well. And I implore to say, why is it an option? If you're a police officer and you've experienced something, why do I have to give you an option to go to counseling? It should be mandated that you go. You need to work through that. If you are constantly doing homicide cases, there's no way that you're functioning at full capacity. It's just not realistic. That should not be an option for you to go and have a safe space. It should be something that's mandatory. I think a lot of things that we're doing in mental health is optional. There's stigma we're still as therapists trying to break down to let people know you're not crazy if you go talk to a therapist. Actually, you're pretty smart. And this is how I sell it to my kids. I said, you have your own personal dumping person. You can come in and say whatever you want to about what's going on with Miss Smith or mommy and daddy, and you can have somebody help you walk through those issues. Kids are becoming more in tune to counseling because celebrities are now saying it's cool. If they say it's cool, then that kids are gonna think it's cool. Tight pants is cool, kids are wearing tight pants. Now they're saying it's cool to have a therapist, so some people are picking up on that. And I want people to know that it doesn't make you crazy to have somebody to talk to. It makes you smart to be able to be in a space where someone can teach you, conflict resolution, where somebody can, listen to why you're being bullied. And this whole thing with bullying, I tried to start a program, Bullying for the Bullies, because they need help. Kids who are bullies have a bigger issue than we really know. And if we can get those kids the help that they need, we can alleviate some of this bullying, which can alleviate kids feeling like they have to bring guns to school to defend themselves. But again, somebody has to slow down long enough to see what's happening with our kids so we can have a better outcome in our community.
Thank you so much. Listen, we are in our last 4 minutes, but we have 2 questions that came in. So I want to see if we can get these questions answered as succinctly as possible. Chief Harris, I'll start the first question with you. What is the department doing to get guns off the streets?
Right now, we are still collecting. I know a while back I did a press conference where we took weapons off the street. We're still doing that on a daily basis. One of the things mentioned is sometimes you're not going to see the person stand there with the gun, so they're being proactive. They're doing the traffic stops. We have people who call in and tell us information. We get guns that way also. But anytime that we have that information or probable cause to lead us to that search, we're trying to collect that weapon to get it off the street, to make sure that we keep the weapons off the street. And I know these are the wrap-up questions, but I definitely wanted to address some more things I didn't get an opportunity to talk on. The mandatory training, there are certain situations that are required for mandatory training. If you're in a situation, depending on what it is, they are required to go to that training. But like she mentioned earlier, we definitely want to encourage making other things that are the option mandatory training so we can move forward for the best mental health of the officers. And also with the community policing, we are doing community policing measures, doing different things in the community. But one thing that I think people really don't see when we talk about what is the police doing from their perspective, a lot of times the focus is on the victim or the suspect, the person that was arrested. We're trying to look at expanding it. Like it was mentioned earlier, what can we do for that whole family? Sometimes it's not just one victim or one suspect, it's a generation. Sometimes it's 3 generations of a family that are dealing with the same issues. So with the mayor mentioned earlier, the Office of Violence Prevention is something that could bring resources for the family, not just the person that's involved in the situation. So getting that support and also encouraging our officers to look at the family dynamic, not just the person that you're dealing with, and see how we can address that issue. One last thing I definitely have to speak on is there was a comment about qualified immunity, and I'm not qualified from a civil perspective, but I will say that when we talk about qualified immunity, it's when officers act in good faith under the color of law, and then there's consideration for their actions. Because of the practice, I don't think it's a good suggestion to remove qualified immunity from police work for the same reasons that we wouldn't remove it from medical field. If a doctor or a surgeon had a situation happen, they're not going to remove that. So I think there should be more consideration on that, because we are charged with doing the job of law enforcement, which I believe is a chosen profession by most, but also we have to look at it, since we're in the church, we have a divine instruction to do our job. So they're not working for me, the chief of police, we're working for one person who runs the nation. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you so much, Chief Harris. There's one last question that timing just won't allow us to get to, but I promise you that we will get your question answered and we will post it out on our Facebook page for you to be sure that your question is answered prayerfully to your liking. Let me say thank you to all of you, our incredible panelists, to you, Mr. Billups, to you, Councilwoman Graham, to you, our counselor and therapist here, Ms. Monique Johnson, certainly to you. This is all kind of centered around policing. So to you, Chief Harris, to you. I don't think I mentioned your law firm earlier. It's Pitts and Presley. Attorney Presley, thank you so much. To you, District Attorney Darrell Bailey, and certainly to you, State Representative Kenyatta Hassel. Listen, to all of you, let me say thank you again so much for joining us on tonight. We literally can continue on talking for hours, but timing just won't allow us. So I pray that your questions have been answered, that we at least pique some interest. But I want to challenge each and every one of you. If you are a member not only of this community, but if you are a member of any community, I pray that you understand that the change you want to see, it starts with you. And so I challenge you to not only, as we've talked about tonight, see something and say something, but I challenge you to get involved. I challenge you to not only speak truth to power, but hey, I even challenge you to speak truth against power. Your efforts and your work can certainly make a difference, but it will not work if you sit on the sidelines. And so I challenge you to get active, get involved, and certainly go after what it is in order to help bring about healthy and safe communities. Thank you all again so much for joining us on tonight. Thank you again to this incredible panel, and we pray God's blessings upon each and every one of you. Have a great night.